Joining us to take a swing at the rationale and risk of using tariffs as part of U.S. policy, our former chief agricultural negotiator for the United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Darci, and former general counsel of the Office of the United States Trade Representative, Mr. Warren Maruyama. Briefly, you both worked for different administrations. So, Ambassador, which administration did you work for?
I was the chief agriculture negotiator in the Obama administration.
And Mr. Maruyama?
Bush 41 and Bush 43.
Thank you both for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get right to it. Mr. Maruyama, let's start with you. Why is Trump using tariffs in the manner he did, particularly given the way that he negotiated the USMCA? What's changed over the last 4 years in his mind?
Well, he's always been convinced that tariffs are a great tool, and so he's using them for just about everything: fentanyl, illegal immigration, reciprocity. But, you know, he's very enthusiastic about tariffs, and this goes back decades.
I want to kind of dig down on it a little bit more. Ambassador, tariffs, good or bad?
Well, tariffs are one tool you can use, and so they aren't inherently good or bad necessarily, but the broad application of tariffs across the economy really will raise costs for U.S. consumers and will create a lot of changes in supply chain, contingency planning, lots of, again, raising prices for consumers, but also raising costs for businesses generally. So tariffs are a tempting tool because they're really strong mechanisms. They change prices immediately, but they're also a really blunt instrument in that they actually damage people on both sides of the transaction, both the seller of the good who suddenly has the tariff attached to their good, but also the buyer too, who now has to figure out what to do to pay those tariffs. Do they increase prices to consumers? Do they lower their profits? Do they go elsewhere?
Mr. Maruyama, with respect to the current economic environment, higher interest rates right now, and the economy is still trying to figure out where it's going. What impact right now do you think it's going to have on this economy?
Tariffs have upsides and downsides. And the downsides are inflation, because a tariff is basically a tax. It's just a specialized tax on imports. So that's going to drive up inflation. It's going to drive up costs for U.S. manufacturers. It'll mean at least our exports, since a lot of them contain imported inputs, aren't going to be as competitive. But the other big downside of tariffs is retaliation, because the trade rules are basically a veneer over law of the jungle. And if we raise our tariffs, the foreigners are going to raise their tariffs on our stuff. And then you have basically a trade war. And that particularly has costs for American agriculture, since it's heavily export dependent, and our three biggest export markets are China, Mexico, and Canada.
I understand, other countries may retaliate against us, but what about the other countries who right now have tariffs on some of our goods we ship to them, but we don't have tariffs on some of the same goods or similar goods shipped to us? Is that fair?
Well, the way that it works is reciprocity in a very broad sense, where we make a calculation that the foreigners are reducing tariffs on the stuff that's really important to us, and we lower our tariffs on stuff that's not important to us, not that important to us, or we don't make. So in a general sense, the system is reciprocal, but we have high tariffs on a lot of things too. Milk, sugar, textiles, some light trucks. So, it all, in the end, the calculation in the past has been that it balances out.
So, Ambassador, I believe you grew up on a farm, is that right?
I did, yes.
So I want to kind of drill into the agricultural aspect of this and the impact on agriculture and tariffs. I think you mentioned that, or Mr. Maruyama did. What impact do tariffs have on agriculture, and what about it with this current presidency, how it's going to impact agriculture?
So far, this America First trade policy that we're seeing is really focused on industries that are dependent on or are competing with imports. But as Warren already mentioned, agriculture is really dependent on exports. So 20% of U.S. agricultural production is exported, about 1 in 3 acres of what we grow. And as Warren also noted, that makes us a tempting target for retaliation. So when we place tariffs on other countries' products, they tend to retaliate with tariffs on U.S. agriculture. And so what tariffs are doing to farmers is really squeezing them in the middle. They're seeing increased prices from steel and aluminum and other tariffs on their inputs, fertilizer, parts, irrigation equipment, etc. And then seeing that their exports can't compete because they have tariffs attached to them when they go into foreign markets. So U.S. agriculture is really sort of stuck in this place where they're getting hit from both sides.
Now, Mr. Maruyama, a quick question for you. Haven't talked about this, but what about the foreign policy component of tariffs? For example, Mexico. I was a federal organized crime prosecutor, and the amount of drugs coming across the border was insane, and the human trafficking as well. Aren't tariffs available use to stop that flow of drugs coming across in America and illegal aliens coming across in America?
Yeah, they are probably up to a point. But one thing about tariffs is they're really going after some of our best allies and trading partners. And another thing is, even with Mexico, while we may be very unhappy about the level of illegal immigration, particularly over the last 4 years, we do need Mexico's cooperation in stopping the flow of immigrants from Central America up to our southern border. And so, you may use it as an attention getter with Mexico, but if you take it too far, you lose that Mexican cooperation, and then probably immigration gets worse.
Ambassador, here's another question for you, and that is, manufacturing jobs left the United States for a simple reason. They were cheaper to do it overseas. So if you bring it back to the United States, and we keep hearing the argument that short-term pain, long-term gain, but if American labor is cheaper and is more expensive rather than American manufacturing is more expensive, doesn't that mean that long-term we're going to have higher prices overall for industries that we bring back home?
Well, I think it raises the question of whether tariffs will, in fact, bring back manufacturing in all sectors. I certainly see the goal in things like semiconductors, advanced chips, certain green technologies. Despite the changes in the policy of this administration, I think we will continue to see more use of solar and wind and other types of energy, and we don't want to be fully dependent on other countries for those. But what point in that manufacturing process will the United States specialize? To what extent do we bring back that manufacturing? Do we need to be self-sufficient? Do we just need to have a firm grounding so that we're not totally dependent on other countries? But yes, it may raise prices. And, I think a question too is we're focused on the border part of that policy now, but are we focused on the worker part of that policy now? We need good domestic policy to go with border policy and make sure we have workers who are prepared to participate in those industries as well in order to make that reshoring goal a success.
So, Ambassador, let's stick with you for a second, switching gears a little bit. When you bring the jobs back home, and let's say the tariffs work and you bring the jobs back home, can you really produce in the United States at a level that keeps those costs down, or are they going to be inherently more expensive?
Well, labor costs certainly are higher in the United States, and that's something that to consider. I think we need also to build our domestic workforce and make sure that they are ready to accept those manufacturing jobs. But I think part of what we're seeing in the current trade conversation is that we're treating trade as though it's a series of bilateral relationships. And what we really know is that our supply chains are very complex, and that, the parts for one car we heard with the Canada and Mexico tariffs might cross multiple borders before that car is finished, right? We see the same thing with a lot of these other technologies. And so while I agree that we don't want to be totally dependent on foreign countries for the manufacture of important and strategic goods, be that steel and aluminum or advanced chips for AI, for example, there are very complex global supply chains that simply putting tariffs on and suggesting we might be self-sufficient because of that is, I think, a bit too simplistic of an answer.
Ambassador Vetter, Mr. Maruyama, thank you both so much for a great conversation.